The woman behind the desk didn't look up when she slid the envelope across to me. Happy birthday, Miss Whitfield. You have until 5 o'clock this afternoon to collect your belongings and vacate the premises. That was it. 3 years of my life inside these walls, summed up in one sentence delivered without a single glance in my direction. I had come here at 15 the winter my mother died. I was leaving now at 18, and nobody was going to notice me walking out the door. I stood in the front office of the Nashville Regional Youth Home for a long moment, holding that envelope in my hands. It was thin, almost weightless. Inside, I knew there was a bus voucher, a resource pamphlet, and a check for $240. That was what the state of Tennessee owed me for aging out of the system. $240. And a pat on the back. I walked back down the hallway to the room I shared with 3 other girls. Micah was already waiting for me on my bed, his small hands folded in his lap. He was 13 years old, but that morning he looked younger. He looked like the little boy I used to push on the tire swing behind our house in Murfreesboro. Back when we still had a house, back when we still had a mother. Ranger sat at his feet, 70 pounds of muscle and scarred fur and quiet loyalty, watching me with those steady amber eyes. Addie, Micah asked. His voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. Where are we going? I sat down beside him on the bed. I put my arm around his shoulders. I felt him lean into me the way he had every night for the last 3 years. Ever since the doctors told us Mama wasn't going to make it out of that hospital bed. I don't know yet, baby, I said. But we're going together, all 3 of us. That's the only thing I know for sure. He nodded. He didn't cry. Micah hadn't cried since the funeral. I looked at Ranger. He was the last piece of our father we had left in this world. When Daddy died over in Afghanistan 8 years ago, his unit sent Ranger home to us in a crate with a folded flag and a letter that said, "This dog served with honor." He belongs with the family now. Ranger had been our shadow ever since. He slept at the foot of Micah's bed every single night at the youth home, even when the caseworkers tried to make him stay in the yard. He wouldn't, and nobody could make him. By 4:30 that afternoon, I had loaded our things into the back of the 1998 Ford Bronco that used to belong to my father. It was rusted along the wheel wells. The passenger door didn't shut all the way, but it ran. The state had held onto it in storage since Mama passed, and they'd released it to me on my 18th birthday, along with a duffel bag full of Daddy's old belongings that I'd never had the courage to open. $340 to our name, a tank and a half of gas, a cooler with peanut butter bread and a jug of water, and a dog who wouldn't let us out of his sight. That was what I had to build a life with. We drove out of the parking lot of that youth home without looking back. I turned onto the interstate heading south, not because I had a plan, but because south felt warmer, and warmer felt safer. We slept in a Walmart parking lot in Franklin that first night. Micah curled up in the back seat with Ranger draped across his legs. I sat in the front, watching the parking lot lights flicker on and off, holding my phone in my hand, trying to figure out what a person is supposed to do when they don't have a home to go home to. That was when the call came. The number was unfamiliar. Area code 731. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, some small voice that sounded a little like my mother's, told me to answer. Hello, is this Adeline Whitfield? The voice on the other end was old, warm, southern in a way that made me think of front porches and iced tea and church fans on hot summer Sundays. Yes, sir, this is Addie. Miss Whitfield, my name is Cornelius Ashford. I'm an attorney out of Willow Creek, Tennessee. I've been trying to reach you for going on 8 months now. The Department of Family Services has been well less than helpful. I sat up straighter in the driver's seat. An attorney? What is this about, Mr. Ashford? There was a pause. I heard the man take a long, slow breath. Miss Whitfield, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this over the phone. Your grandfather, Obadiah Whitfield, passed away 8 months ago. He named you and your brother as the sole beneficiaries of his estate. He left everything he had to the 2 of you. I couldn't speak for a moment. My grandfather. I had a grandfather. Daddy had told me more than once that both of his parents were dead, that he'd grown up in a group home in Ohio, that we didn't have any family on his side, not one single soul, And here was this man on the phone, this stranger with a voice like warm honey, telling me my grandfather had just died, and that he'd known who I was, and that he'd left me something. "Mr. Ashford," I said. My voice was shaking. "I don't understand. My father told me his parents were both gone. He said he grew up in Ohio." Another pause. Longer this time. "Miss Whitfield, I believe there is a great deal you don't know. Your grandfather was my dearest friend for over 50 years. He spent the last 15 years of his life trying to find you and your brother. He never stopped looking. Not once. Now I would very much like to sit down with you in person. Are you able to come to Willow Creek?" I looked over at Micah. He was asleep in the back seat, one hand curled around Ranger's collar. I looked at the dashboard. The gas gauge read just under half a tank. "Where is Willow Creek?" I asked. "About 2 hours west of where you are, if I had to guess. Right along the Tennessee River. About an hour north of Memphis. Just a little town. Population 3,000 and change on a busy Sunday." I closed my eyes. "We'll be there tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting at my office, Miss Whitfield. Number 14 on Main Street. You can't miss it." And Miss Whitfield, "Yes, sir. He loved you. Your grandfather loved you and your brother more than anything in this world. I want you to know that before you get here." He hung up. I sat in that parking lot for a long time, holding the phone in my lap, watching my brother sleep, listening to Ranger's soft breathing from the back seat. And for the first time in 3 years since the day we buried our mother, I let myself cry. Now, before we go any further, I want to stop and say something to you. If you're listening to Adeline's story and it's touching your heart the way it's touching mine, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps me bring more stories like this one to you. And I want to ask you something. Have you ever received a phone call that changed your entire life in a single moment? Tell me in the comments below. I read everyone. Now let's find out what waits for Adeline and Micah in Willow Creek. The road into Willow Creek came up on us just before 9 o'clock in the morning. It was one of those small southern towns you drive right through without meaning to. A single traffic light hanging from a wire in the middle of the intersection. A main street lined with brick storefronts, some of them still with their original hand-painted signs from decades gone by. A Methodist church on one corner with a steeple that leaned just slightly to the west. A diner called the Blue Willow with a plate glass window and a hand-lettered sign in the corner that said "Best Biscuits in the County, established 1962. I pulled the Bronco up in front of number 14. It was a 2-story brick building with dark green shutters and a wooden sign that read Ashford Law Office in faded gold lettering. But before we went in, I needed a moment to breathe, and Micah needed water. So we crossed the street to the Blue Willow first just to use the restroom and settle our nerves. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s. She had silver hair pulled up in a bun and a name tag that read Carol. She looked up when we walked in, and her eyes went straight past me to the dog at Micah's side. She stopped what she was doing. She set down her coffee pot. She came out from behind the counter slowly, like a person approaching a memory. "Where did you get that dog, honey?" she asked me softly. "He belonged to my father," I said. "He came home to us when Daddy passed." Carol's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and touched Ranger's scarred head. He stood perfectly still and let her. "He looks just like Duke," she whispered. "Just exactly like Duke. Obadiah Whitfield had a dog named Duke who looked just like this one all the way back in the 70s. Belgian Malinois. Same markings, same amber eyes. That dog rode in Obadiah's truck for 15 years. Now isn't that something?" She looked up at me. She really looked at me for the first time, and I watched something shift in her face. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered. "You're David's girl, aren't you?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod. Carol pressed her hand to her mouth, and then she said very quietly, "Honey, you go on across the street to Corny's office. He's been waiting for you a long, long time." We walked back out into the morning sunlight. My legs felt strange under me, like I was walking through a dream. Micah reached up and took my hand. He hadn't held my hand in 3 years. The bell above Mr. Ashford's door chimed softly when we pushed it open. He rose from behind his desk to greet us, and I knew right away he was the man from the phone. He was 74 if he was a day, with a full head of silver hair, and a face that had been kind for a long, long time. He wore a gray suit that had probably been tailored to fit him 20 years ago, and it hung on him now the way old clothes do when a body has grown thinner with age. But his eyes, Oh, his eyes. His eyes filled up when he saw me. "Sweet Lord in heaven," he said softly. "You look just like your daddy." He came around the desk and reached for my hands. His own were spotted and thin, but the grip was firm. "Miss Adeline, Master Micah, welcome home." He led us into a back room where he had already set out a pitcher of iced tea and a plate of shortbread cookies. Ranger settled at Micah's feet. Mr. Ashford opened a leather folder and slid a photograph across the table to me. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture of my father. He was young, maybe 20 years old, standing in front of a white farmhouse with peeling paint. He had his arm around an older man with the same crooked smile my daddy had. They were both laughing at something. There was a barn in the background, and a field of what looked like corn stretching out behind them. I didn't say anything for a long time, because my father had told me he grew up in Ohio. But this picture of him standing in front of a farmhouse in what I already somehow knew was Willow Creek, Tennessee. It told a different story. "Your grandfather's name was Obadiah Whitfield," Mr. Ashford said quietly. "He was born in that farmhouse. So was your father. So was your father's father before him. Blackwood Farm has been in the Whitfield family for 87 years. 87 acres of the best bottom land in this part of the state. Corn, soybeans, some cattle when your granddaddy was younger. He willed all of it to you and your brother." Micah reached for the picture. He held it close to his face and stared at the young man who was our father. He didn't say anything. He just stared. "Mr. Ashford," I finally managed to whisper, "why didn't my father ever tell us about any of this?" The old lawyer looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy. "There was a falling out, Adeline. A bad one. Your father was 20 years old and he fell in love with a young woman named Ellie Doyle. She was a waitress at the Blue Willow right across the street. Your grandfather, God rest him, he was a proud man. A hard man in some ways. He had ideas about what kind of woman his only son ought to marry. And Ellie Doyle wasn't that woman in his eyes. There were words spoken, terrible words, words that can't be taken back." I felt the tears start to come. "Your daddy left Willow Creek in the winter of 1998, Mr. Ashford said. He drove east in a truck a whole lot like the one you two just pulled up in. He took your mother with him. They landed in Nashville that spring, got married at the courthouse without a soul from either family to witness it. Ellie never came back to Willow Creek either. Her own daddy had passed the year before, and there wasn't much left holding her here. She and David built a life over there in Nashville, the best they knew how. But he knew about us," I whispered. "He knew we existed." "Oh, honey, he knew. He hired investigators. He wrote letters. He filed petitions with the courts. When your mother passed and you children got taken into the system, he tried to gain custody. But by that point, he was 72 years old and living alone on a farm that had gone to seed. The state of Tennessee doesn't hand grandchildren over to old men living alone in the country, Adeline. Not without a fight. And your granddaddy, well, he fought. Lord, how he fought. He just ran out of time before he could finish." The tears were streaming down my face now. Micah had come to stand beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder. I felt Ranger press against my leg. "Come with me, both of you," Mr. Ashford said. "I want to show you your home." Blackwood Farm sat at the end of a long dirt road that wound up through a stand of oak trees older than the town itself. Mr. Ashford drove ahead of us in a dusty blue sedan, and I followed in the Bronco, one hand on the steering wheel, the other reaching back to grip Micah's fingers. Ranger stood on the seat between us with his nose out the window. Then we came around the last curve, and there it was. The farmhouse stood in the middle of a wide green clearing, white with black shutters, 2 stories tall with a wraparound porch and a peaked tin roof that caught the morning sun. The paint was peeling in long strips down the sides, like sunburned skin coming loose after too many summers. The porch sagged on one corner where a beam had rotted through. A few of the upstairs windows had been boarded up with plywood, but behind it, stretching all the way to the horizon, were fields. Fields of soybeans, green and shimmering in the wind. A long red barn with a copper weather vane on top spinning slow in the breeze. A wooden fence, some of it broken, some of it still standing tall, marking the boundary of what was ours. Ours. The word felt strange in my mouth. I hadn't owned anything in my life bigger than a suitcase. I pulled the Bronco up in front of the porch and turned off the engine. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just sat there listening to the crickets and the wind moving through the tall grass. Micah opened his door first. He climbed down slowly, and Ranger jumped out after him. My brother walked up to the porch steps like he was walking into a dream. He put his hand on the wooden railing. He turned to look at me with his eyes wide. "Addie," he said, "is this really ours?" Mr. Ashford came up beside me as I got out of the truck. He handed me a heavy iron key on a leather thong. "Every last acre of it, sweetheart. 87 acres. 4 bedrooms and 2 baths in the main house. A barn that needs a new roof but has good bones. A well that still gives cold, clear water. And 38 years of memories inside those walls. Property taxes have been paid through the end of this year by your grandfather's savings. What happens after that is up to you." I climbed the porch steps. My hand was shaking as I fit the key into the lock. The door swung open with a soft groan. Inside, the air was cool and dim. Sunlight came slanting through the tall front windows and lit up the dust motes floating in the entryway. There was a coat rack made of deer antlers. A grandfather clock stopped at 7:43. A hallway with photographs lining both walls. Faded oval frames holding faces I didn't recognize. But who all had the same eyes as my father, as Micah, as me. I walked down that hallway slowly, touching each frame as I went. Great-grandparents, a young couple on their wedding day in 1946. A boy in a Little League uniform holding a baseball bat. A young man in an Army uniform, my grandfather, standing beside a pickup truck. At the end of the hallway on a small side table sat the last picture. It was a photograph of a baby girl. She had a pink bow in her hair and she was laughing at something just out of frame. It was me. I don't know how, but I knew it was me. I picked up the frame. On the back in trembling handwriting, someone had written my Adeline, age 2, from her mother before she disappeared from us. God bring her home someday. I sat down right there on the hallway floor and I cried. Micah came and sat down beside me. He put his arm around my shoulders. Ranger lay down across both of our laps, and for the first time in 8 years since my father had died and the world had come apart, I felt something I couldn't name, something warm, something that felt an awful lot like being wanted. The next morning we met the Bishops. Hattie and Wendell Bishop had farmed the land next to ours for 43 years. They came walking up our dirt road at 7 in the morning, and Hattie was carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a red checkered tea towel. Hattie was 68 years old, round and soft in the way that grandmothers in storybooks are supposed to be round and soft. She had white hair pulled back in a bun and a smile that took up her whole face. Wendell was 70, tall and lean and quiet, wearing overalls and a John Deere cap. "Now you must be little Adeline," Hattie said, her eyes filling up before she'd even gotten to the top of the porch steps. "And this precious boy must be Micah. Oh, honey. Oh, sweet Jesus. Your granddaddy would just be over the moon." She set the casserole down on the porch rail and pulled me into a hug before I could say a word. She smelled like lavender and biscuits. She held on for a long time, and when she stepped back, she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Wendell, get on over here. Come meet these babies." Wendell tipped his cap. He didn't hug us, but he looked at Micah for a long moment, and then he said, "Son, you got your granddaddy's eyes. I want you to know that. He was one of the finest men who ever walked this piece of ground. I hope you'll let me tell you about him sometime." Micah nodded. He couldn't speak. Hattie put her arm around my waist and walked me back inside my own house. "Now, honey, you've got a chicken and dumpling casserole here that ought to last you 2 days if you're careful with it. There's cornbread wrapped up in the towel. Wendell brought you a jug of fresh milk from the Jerseys, and I've got a peach pie on the counter for later. I'm going to come by tomorrow with some cleaning supplies, and we're going to give this old house a proper wipe down. That granddaddy of yours, God love him, he wasn't much for dusting the last few years." She stopped in the middle of the kitchen. She turned to face me. She took both my hands in hers. "Adeline, I want to say something, and I want you to hear me. Your granddaddy was our dearest friend for 30 years. When my Wendell had his heart attack 6 years back, it was Obadiah who drove me to the hospital every night for 3 weeks. Wouldn't take a dime for the gas. When our barn burned down in the storm of 2009, it was Obadiah who organized the neighbors and had us rebuilt in 6 weeks flat. That man was a saint, a hard-headed, stubborn old saint. And the only thing that ever broke his heart was that he couldn't find you two." She squeezed my hands. "You are home, sweetheart. I want you to feel that. You are home, and every soul in Willow Creek is going to be at your door in the next week bringing you a casserole. Just you wait. She wasn't lying. Over the next 3 days, we met 11 neighbors. Some brought food, some brought advice. Some just came to sit on our porch and tell us stories about the grandfather we'd never known. Old Mr. Halston brought a set of tools that had belonged to my father when he was a boy. Miss Willa from the church brought a quilt she'd made and blessed for us. Reverend Ezekiel Hollis from the Methodist Church stopped by with a Bible that had belonged to my grandfather, its pages worn soft from a lifetime of use. And on the fourth day, when I was carrying a load of clean linens up to what had been my grandfather's bedroom, Ranger began to scratch at the floor of the hallway. He wasn't playing. He was working. His ears were flat against his skull, and his nose was pressed to a specific spot at the corner where the hallway rug had curled up. He scratched. He whined. He looked up at me. "What is it, boy?" I whispered. I set the linens down. I got on my knees. I pulled back the corner of that old braided rug. Underneath one of the floorboards was loose. I could see the seams where someone had cut it and put it back years ago. Ranger sat back on his haunches and watched me, tail thumping softly against the wooden floor. I pried the board up with my fingers. Beneath it, nestled in a hollow between the joists, was a rusted metal tin. It was the kind of tin you'd have kept cookies or shortbread in back in the 1950s, faded and dented, but sealed shut with old electrical tape. My hands were shaking as I lifted it out. I carried the tin down the stairs. Micah was in the kitchen drawing something in his sketchbook at the table. Ranger followed me down each step so close I could feel his breath on my calf. "Micah, come here. Look." He came over. We sat down on the floor in the living room, and I peeled back the tape. I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe 50, each one in a plain white envelope, each one addressed in the same careful, old-fashioned handwriting, each one addressed to me. Some to Adeline Whitfield, some to Micah Whitfield, some to both of us together. The addresses had changed over the years, following us from foster home to foster home, from Nashville to Chattanooga and back again, and every single one of them had a red stamp across the front. Return to sender, no such address. I lifted out the first letter. The date on the postmark was 13 years ago. I would have been 5 years old. Micah would have been an infant. I opened it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Adeline, today is your 5th birthday. Somewhere in this world you are 5 years old today, and I have never held you in my arms. I have never watched you blow out a candle. I have never heard you laugh. I do not even know for certain what color your hair is. But I love you, sweet child. I have loved you every single day since I learned you existed. And I am trying, Adeline. I am trying every day to find you. I hope that one day you will read this letter. I hope you will know that you were never forgotten, not for one single moment. With all my heart, Grandpa Obadiah." I couldn't read anymore. The tears were coming so fast I couldn't see. Micah picked up the next letter with his small, careful hands. He opened it, and he began to read out loud in that soft, steady voice of his. "My dear boy, Micah, today is your 1st birthday. Your grandmother would have been so proud of you." We sat on that living room floor for the rest of the afternoon. Ranger lay between us, his head resting on my knee. We read every single one of those letters, 47 of them, one for every birthday, every Christmas, every Easter that my grandfather had missed. 13 years of a man reaching out into the darkness, hoping that his love would find us somehow. Even when the mail kept coming back, someone had blocked those letters from reaching us. Someone had made sure every single one came back, marked no such address. Even when we lived in one place for years at a time, they never got through. Someone, somewhere, had made sure we never knew. Let me stop right here for just a moment, because I don't know about you, but I need to catch my breath. Adeline and Micah just discovered that their grandfather had been reaching out to them for 13 years, and somehow every single letter came back. Now, before we go any further, please take a moment to hit that like button if this story is moving you the way it's moving me, and I want you to tell me something. Who do you think blocked those letters? Take a guess in the comments. Your words matter to me. Now let's find out what Adeline does next. That evening, I sat on the porch swing with the tin of letters on my lap. The sun was going down over the western fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Micah was inside brushing Ranger. I could hear him talking softly to the dog, the way he'd started doing more and more since we got here, like he was remembering how to use his voice. Mr. Ashford's Buick came rolling up the driveway just before dusk. He climbed the steps and eased himself down onto the swing beside me. I showed him the letters. He looked at them for a long time. He picked up one, then another, then another. His hands were shaking. "Oh, Obadiah," he whispered. "You old fool. You never gave up, did you?" "Mr. Ashford," I said, "who could have done this? Who could have made sure these letters never got to us?" He set the letters down carefully. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Sweetheart, when your daddy left Willow Creek, he was angry. He was young and he was proud just like his own father. And he made a decision that I believe he regretted every day of his life afterward. He filed a change of address hold with the Postal Service. Anything from Obadiah Whitfield to any address associated with him or his family was to be returned. He didn't want the letters. He didn't want the phone calls. He didn't want the reminders. I felt something break in my chest. But then Daddy died, 10 years ago. Why did the letters still keep coming back after that? Mr. Ashford was quiet for a long moment. "Because your mother Ellie, she carried the same wound. Your father had told her terrible things about your grandfather. And when your daddy died, your mother, well, she left the block in place. I don't think she meant harm by it. I think she was just trying to protect what she believed she needed to protect. Ellie was a good woman, Adeline. She was a good woman who was hurt very deeply by a very old fight. And after she passed the block, just stayed in the system. Nobody thought to remove it, not until it was too late. I looked out over the fields. The sun was almost gone. The sky was the color of a bruise, deep purple fading into black at the edges. Two people had loved us. My grandfather, my mother, and a wound from 25 years ago had kept them from ever finding each other. Mr. Ashford put his hand on mine. "Adeline, your granddaddy knew at the end that he was running out of time. He wrote you one last letter. He didn't put it in the mail. He hid it somewhere on this property, hoping that one day you'd find it. He didn't tell me where. He said, 'Corny, if that dog ever comes home to Blackwood Farm, he'll find it. He'll find it.'" I looked at Ranger curled up now on the porch beside my feet. "Did he know about Ranger?" "He knew your daddy had a service dog. He'd made phone calls. He'd asked questions. He knew that dog was the last piece of David that was still walking this earth. And I think in his heart, he believed that dog would somehow find its way home." I reached down. I ran my hand along Ranger's scarred head. He opened his amber eyes and looked at me. "Go find it, buddy," I whispered. 2 nights later, Ranger woke me up at 3 in the morning. He was standing by the bedroom door with his ears pricked and his eyes on me. He would not lie back down. He would not settle. I got up. I put on my grandfather's old flannel coat, the one I had found in the hall closet. I picked up the flashlight from the kitchen counter, and I followed Ranger out across the yard to the barn. The night was still. The stars were bright the way they are, only in the country. Ranger walked ahead of me with his head low. He led me up the ladder to the hayloft. He walked to the far corner. He sat down and looked at me. His tail thumped once against the wooden floor. I moved the hay bales aside. Underneath, I found an old blue coffee tin, Folgers from at least 20 years ago. I lifted the lid. Inside was a single letter folded in half, sealed in a plain white envelope. The front of the envelope read in my grandfather's handwriting, "For my grandchildren when they come home, whenever that may be." I sat down on a hay bale in the dark of that loft, with the flashlight in my lap. Ranger lay down beside me, and I made myself a promise. I would not open this letter yet. I would save it. I would save it for the moment when I needed my grandfather's voice the most. I tucked the letter inside my grandfather's coat close to my heart. Ranger and I walked back to the house through the tall spring grass, and I slept for the first time in weeks without dreams. He arrived on our porch on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after Ranger found that letter. He drove up in a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and Tennessee plates that read Kane1. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him too well, and shoes that had no business being on a farm road. He was 52 years old, with a full head of gray-black hair combed back from a high forehead, and the kind of white teeth you only see on television. He knocked on my screen door with the back of his knuckles. Miss Whitfield, Rutherford Kane, Kane Development LLC out of Nashville. Do you have a few moments? I stepped out onto the porch. I didn't invite him in. Ranger came out and stood beside me, his head lowered, watching this stranger with steady eyes. Beautiful piece of property you got here, Miss Whitfield. Beautiful. I've been admiring it from the road for a couple of years now. My condolences on your grandfather's passing, by the way. Fine man. Fine man. I didn't say anything. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather portfolio. Miss Whitfield, I'll be direct with you. I'm here on a matter of some urgency. Your grandfather, God rest him, took out a loan against this property about 18 months before he passed. He borrowed $180,000 from a private lender that I represent. Now that note came due 60 days ago, and with penalties and interest, the amount owed to my company right now stands at $212,000. He handed me the portfolio. Inside were documents, a promissory note, a lien on the property, all bearing what appeared to be my grandfather's signature. Now, Miss Whitfield, I understand this is a lot to take in, and I want you to know I've come here today in a spirit of compassion. The state of Tennessee gives you 90 days to satisfy this debt or transfer the property. But I am prepared to make you a very generous offer. I will pay you $50,000 in cash today in exchange for a clean transfer of title. That's $50,000 for a young lady and her little brother to start a new life. What do you say? I looked down at the papers. I looked at my grandfather's signature. It looked right, but something inside me was screaming that it wasn't. Some deep, cold instinct that had kept me alive for 18 years in a system that eats children whole. Mr. Kane, I said quietly, I'm going to need to have my attorney look at these papers. His smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Of course, sweetheart, of course. Take your time. But do keep in mind that the 90-day window is ticking. And if we can't reach an agreement in that time frame, well, my company will have no choice but to foreclose. And when that happens, you don't get $50,000. You don't get one penny. You get walked off this property with whatever you can carry. He tipped an imaginary hat. You have a blessed day now, Miss Whitfield. I'll be in touch. He walked back to his Cadillac. He drove away. Ranger watched him go with a low, silent growl deep in his chest. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my grandfather's oak kitchen table with those loan papers spread out in front of me, staring at his signature under the yellow light of an old lamp. Ranger lay on the floor beside my chair. Micah was upstairs asleep in the twin bed that had been our father's when he was a boy. I picked up the phone at midnight. I called Mr. Ashford. He came over first thing in the morning, still in his house coat and slippers under his suit jacket. He spread the papers out. He put on his reading glasses. He studied them for a long time, then he took them off. He looked at me. Adeline, I want you to look at the date on this signature. I looked. September the 11th of the previous year. Yes, sir. Your grandfather passed away on August the 23rd of that same year, 3 weeks before this document was signed. I stared at him. I stared at him for a long moment while my brain caught up with what he had just said. Rutherford Kane's promissory note had been signed by my grandfather 3 weeks after my grandfather was dead. It's a forgery, I whispered. It's a forgery, sweetheart, and a sloppy one at that. Now I want you to understand something. Rutherford Kane is not a stupid man. He is a very smart man who has been doing this in West Tennessee for about a decade. He preys on elderly property owners. He waits for them to die. He shows up with forged loan papers and cash offers, and he counts on the grieving heirs being too overwhelmed to fight. He has taken 6 farms in this county alone that we know of. Probably more. Then why hasn't anyone stopped him? Mr. Ashford's face went very serious. Because the people he's taken from were older folks, widows, elderly siblings who inherited land they didn't want. Nobody had the fight in them, Adeline. Nobody had the youth or the anger. He picks his marks carefully. But he didn't count on you and your brother inheriting this place. He didn't count on a girl who spent 3 years fighting for her life in the foster care system. He miscalculated, sweetheart. He miscalculated bad. I felt something rise up in me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, something that felt a whole lot like fury. "What do we do, Mr. Ashford?" He smiled at me, a slow, tired wolf smile. "We build a case, sweetheart, and then we take it to the county courthouse. And then we watch Rutherford Kane get what has been coming to him for a long, long time." Now, before Adeline and Mr. Ashford take on Rutherford Kane, I want you to do something for me. If you're feeling what Adeline is feeling right now, that fire in her chest, that righteous anger for a grandfather she never got to meet, please tap that subscribe button. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take what belonged to you and your family? I want to hear your stories. Now let's watch what happens next. The next 3 weeks were the busiest and the strangest of my life. I woke up every morning at 5 and I made coffee in an old percolator on the gas stove. I fed Ranger. I fed the chickens that Wendell Bishop had brought over in the back of his truck one Saturday morning. I sat on the porch and watched the sun come up over land that was mine. That belonged to me and my brother. Then I got to work. Mr. Ashford put me in touch with a woman at the county records office named Delphine Bishop. She was Hattie and Wendell's 19-year-old granddaughter, and she was working part-time filing property records while she took online college classes. Delphine had grown up on the farm next door to ours. She had known my grandfather. And when she found out what Rutherford Kane was trying to do, she went hard and quiet the way Southern women go when they mean business. Delphine and I spent every afternoon at the county courthouse together. We pulled property records. We pulled tax filings. We pulled the death certificates of every elderly property owner Kane's LLC had bought from in the last decade. We found a pattern. Every single sale, every single forged loan, signed within 4 to 8 weeks after the previous owner had died. Delphine printed out a spreadsheet. She laid it on the table in front of Mr. Ashford. He looked at it and he shook his head. "Sweet Lord in heaven," he said. "This man has stolen $31 million in farmland from grieving families over 10 years, and not one soul has ever stopped him." "Until now," Delphine said quietly. Micah, meanwhile, was becoming a different boy. I don't know how else to say it. My quiet, wounded little brother was becoming a different boy in front of my eyes. Wendell Bishop had taken a shine to him. Every morning at 6:30, Wendell would come rolling up our driveway in his old red pickup, and Micah would be waiting on the porch with Ranger. Wendell would drive him out to the fields, and he would teach him things. How to drive a tractor, how to check the soybean plants for aphids, how to fix a broken fence post with a spool of baling wire and a pair of pliers. Micah would come home at lunchtime smelling of hay and sun and diesel fuel, and his cheeks would be pink from being outside all morning. And he would talk. He would talk all through lunch. He would tell me about the barn owl that lived in the loft, about the way Wendell whistled a certain way when the cows needed to come in, about how Wendell said his hands were the right shape for farming. Micah's hands were the right shape for something. For the first time in years, I could see him becoming a person again. Hattie taught me how to cook. Not fancy cooking, not the kind of cooking you'd see on television. Just farm cooking. Chicken and dumplings from scratch. Corn casserole, sweet potato pie. She would come over on Sunday afternoons and stand beside me at my grandfather's stove, and she would show me things her own mother had taught her and her mother's mother before that. She never said it, but I understood what she was doing. She was teaching me the ways of a place, so I could belong. Reverend Hollis came by twice a week. He never preached at me. He never asked me if I'd been to church. He just sat on the porch and drank sweet tea and told me stories about my grandfather. About the time Obadiah Whitfield had paid for a young man's college tuition when his family couldn't afford it, and had never wanted the boy or his family to know it was him. About the time Obadiah had spent a whole winter delivering firewood to widows in the county, working alone in the cold. Because he said corny, they got no man to do it for them, so I'll be the man. About the way Obadiah had cried on the day he learned my mother had died. Because he understood then that he had lost his last chance to make things right. I sat and I listened, and every story built up the picture of a man in my mind, a man who had loved me, a man I would never get to meet. Let me stop here for just one more moment. If you're an older woman listening to this story tonight, and you know what it feels like to lose someone before you got to make things right with them, I want you to know that I see you. That regret is a heavy thing to carry, Adeline is carrying it now for a grandfather she never met. And if this story is moving, you please subscribe. Tell me in the comments about someone in your life you wish you'd known better. Share your heart with me. The morning we filed the paperwork was a bright, cool Thursday in early October. Delphine drove me and Mr. Ashford to the county courthouse in her little red Corolla. Micah had insisted on staying behind at the farm with Wendell to help load hay bales into the loft. I don't think he could stand the idea of being cooped up in a courthouse hallway all day. Ranger, though, refused to be left behind. He rode in the back seat with me, calm as could be, watching the countryside roll by. We walked into the county clerk's office at 9 o'clock. Mr. Ashford presented the formal complaint. He presented the evidence. He presented the forged signature, the death certificate, and the pattern of Rutherford Kane's business dealings going back a decade. The county attorney, a woman named Judith Marlowe, listened to Mr. Ashford's presentation with her hands folded in her lap. When he was finished, she nodded once, and she picked up her telephone. "Yes, this is Judith Marlowe. Please put me through to the district attorney's office in Nashville. This is a matter of considerable urgency." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The word spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Turns out, when you have been quietly, methodically robbing families for a decade in a small town in Tennessee, and someone finally stands up to point at you and say the word thief out loud, the whole town remembers all at once. The families Kane had bought from began to come forward, or their surviving relatives did. An elderly woman named Bertha Ellery, whose sister had been one of Kane's victims 6 years ago, drove up to my farmhouse in a wheelchair-accessible van and told me the whole story of how her sister had signed papers under duress in the hospice unit 3 days before she died. A man named Cleon Poteet, whose father's farm had been taken in 2018, brought me a folder of documents his father had kept in a safe, showing that the loan Kane had claimed his father took out was for a piece of land his father had actually inherited free and clear from 1971. By the time the hearing came, we had 8 families ready to testify. 8 families who had been quietly grieving. 8 families who had a bright, hard-eyed 18-year-old girl standing in front of them saying he's not doing this again. Not to us, not to anyone. The morning of the hearing, I wore my mother's blue dress. Hattie Bishop had found it in a box in the attic of the farmhouse. It had been my mother's from when she was a young waitress at the Blue Willow Diner. My grandfather had kept it for 25 years, folded carefully in tissue paper, waiting for the daughter-in-law he had once turned away to come home, or maybe waiting for a granddaughter. Hattie ironed it for me the night before. She sat with me at the kitchen table and she pressed the folds out one by one with her small, careful hands. "Your granddaddy would want you to wear this, honey," she said. I truly believe that. I looked at myself in the tall oval mirror in the hallway that morning. The mirror that had watched my father go off to war and my grandfather grow old alone. My mother's blue dress fit me like it had been made for me. My hair was pulled back the way my mother had worn hers in her wedding photograph. And behind me in the mirror I could see Micah, standing in a button-down shirt Wendell had loaned him, holding Ranger's leash. My family. My whole broken, beautiful family. We drove to the courthouse in the Bronco. The gallery was packed. I couldn't believe it. Every seat was full. There were people standing along the back wall. Hattie and Wendell Bishop were there. Reverend Hollis was there. Delphine and her mother and father. Old Mr. Halston with his cane. Miss Willa from the church. Carol from the Blue Willow, whose grandmother had been friends with my mother when they were girls. Farmers I had never met. Widows in Sunday hats. A whole town had come to sit behind me, to sit for my grandfather. Rutherford Kane sat at the defense table with 2 Nashville lawyers in expensive suits. He was smiling when I walked in. He was still smiling when the judge called the courtroom to order. He stopped smiling when Mr. Ashford presented the death certificate. He stopped smiling when Delphine took the stand and in her clear, quiet Southern voice walked the court through 11 years of falsified documents. He stopped smiling when the first of the other families took the stand. And he wasn't smiling at all when the judge, a stern woman named Judge Winetta Blackburn, called me up to the witness stand. I stood there in my mother's blue dress. I held the last letter my grandfather had written me, the one Ranger had found for me in the barn. Ranger sat at the base of the witness stand, watching every soul in that room. Judge Blackburn nodded at me. Miss Whitfield, please read your statement for the court. I took a deep breath. I unfolded the letter. I had waited until now to read it, until this morning. I had wanted to hear my grandfather's voice for the first time in the place where he could still speak for himself. Your Honor, I said. My voice shook a little. I would like to read a letter that was written by my grandfather Obadiah Whitfield in the last month of his life. He hid it for me on our farm. He hid it, hoping I would find it someday. I did find it, and I would like everyone in this courtroom, including Mr. Kane, to hear what my grandfather wanted me to know. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Adeline, my dearest Micah, if you are reading this, then you have come home to Blackwood Farm. I have prayed for that day for as long as I can remember. I have prayed for it every morning at the kitchen window, watching the sun come up over the eastern field. I have prayed for it every evening on the porch swing. I have prayed for it every night beside the bed that used to be your father's. God has finally heard me, and I am at peace. I want you to know something. Your father was a good man. He was a good, proud, hard-headed man who I loved with everything in me and who I did not know how to hold on to. I lost him because I could not bend. I could not bend when he needed me to, and I have paid for that stiffness every day of my life since. But he loved you. Whatever else you know or don't know about your father, please know that. He loved you with everything he had. He named you Adeline after his grandmother, my mother, who used to sing to him on this porch when he was a little boy. He named your brother Micah after the prophet because he believed you both would grow up to do just and merciful things in a world that badly needs them. Blackwood Farm is yours. Every acre, every board, every memory. It has been in our family for 4 generations. I want you to know that you can do whatever you want with it. You can sell it. You can keep it. You can burn it to the ground if that is what you need to do. It is your inheritance and your choice. But please, please, before you decide, walk the land. Sleep in the house. Meet the neighbors. Let this place tell you who you are. You come from people who fought hard for a piece of ground, who buried their dead in the hill behind the barn, who loved their children even when they didn't know how to say it right. You are not alone in this world, sweet girl. You have never been alone. You have a whole cemetery full of people who loved you, waiting quietly on the hill, hoping you would come home so they could rest. I love you. I love you. I love you. Your grandfather, Obadiah. The courtroom was silent. I looked up. I looked at Rutherford Kane. He was staring down at the table in front of him, and I could see that a muscle in his jaw was jumping. He would not meet my eyes. I looked at Judge Blackburn. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and I saw very clearly a single tear roll down her cheek. I looked at my brother in the front row. Micah was crying openly, and Hattie Bishop had her arm around him, and Wendell Bishop had his cap in his hands, and every soul in that gallery was weeping. Your Honor, I said, this is what Mr. Kane tried to steal from us. This is what he tried to steal from every family sitting behind me today. He didn't just try to steal land. He tried to steal us from each other. He tried to make sure we would never hear our grandparents' voices telling us we were loved. Please, Your Honor, please don't let him do it anymore. Judge Blackburn nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Whitfield. You may step down. The hearing lasted 2 more hours. When Judge Blackburn finally issued her ruling, she did it slowly, carefully, and with a fury that made the wood of the bench tremble under her fingertips. She invalidated the loan. She awarded damages. She referred Rutherford Kane for criminal prosecution on 11 counts of forgery and wire fraud. She ordered every property he had taken to be reviewed by a special court-appointed panel. And when the bailiff put the handcuffs on Rutherford Kane and led him out of that courtroom, the entire gallery of Willow Creek rose to their feet. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. They just stood in silence, watching a decade of quiet grief walk out of a courthouse in chains. Ranger looked up at me. His amber eyes were calm. I put my hand on his head. We did it, buddy, I whispered. We did it. Take a moment right here to breathe with me. Because Adeline just did something very few young people ever do. She stood up in front of a whole town and she fought for what her family loved. And she won. If you are cheering for her right now, please give this video a like. It means the world to me. And I want you to tell me in the comments, what does home mean to you? What have you fought for? Now let's go home with Adeline. 6 months later, on a bright morning in the second week of April, the whole town of Willow Creek came to Blackwood Farm. Wendell had spread the word at the feed store. Hattie had spread the word at the Methodist church. Delphine had spread the word at the county courthouse. And Reverend Hollis had spread the word from the pulpit on Sunday morning. They came in pickup trucks. They came in cars. They came on foot from the neighboring farms. 63 people by Micah's count. They came with ladders and hammers and paintbrushes. They came with lumber that Wendell had ordered from the sawmill up in Bolivar. They came with fresh sod and rose bushes and tomato seedlings. They came with a portable grill and 100 pounds of pulled pork and enough sweet tea to drown a small horse. Miss Willa organized the women. Wendell organized the men. Reverend Hollis said a prayer of blessing under the big oak tree in the front yard. And then everybody got to work. By nightfall, my grandfather's farmhouse had a new roof. The porch had been rebuilt. The peeling paint had been scraped, and the whole house had been painted a fresh, clean white. The broken fence had been mended. The rose bushes my grandmother had planted 40 years ago, long dead, and overgrown, had been cut back and replanted. The barn had a new coat of red paint and a new copper weather vane, made by old Mr. Halston in his workshop. We sat on the porch that evening, eating pulled pork sandwiches with our neighbors. Micah was in the yard playing catch with two boys his age from the Baptist church. Ranger was lying at Wendell's feet. Hattie was rocking in the porch swing beside me, and she had her arm around my shoulders. "You know what your granddaddy used to say?" she asked me quietly. "What did he say, Hattie?" "He used to say that a home isn't a place. A home is a promise. A promise between people that they will show up for each other, that they will build the walls together, that they will patch the roof together, that they will bury each other with dignity when the time comes. Your granddaddy said, Corny, a house is just wood and nails, but a home is what happens when the neighbors show up." I looked out at my yard, at my brother laughing with new friends, at my dog watching him with steady amber eyes, at the sun going down over 87 acres of land that had been in my family for 4 generations, at the people who had shown up, who had built these walls with me, who had promised without ever saying it out loud that I was not alone. I put my head on Hattie Bishop's shoulder. I let myself cry. Not the way I had cried in the youth home, not the way I had cried on that first night in the Walmart parking lot in Franklin, not the way I had cried when I read my grandfather's letters. I cried the way a person cries when they have finally come home. The following Sunday, we walked up the hill behind the barn together, Micah and me and Ranger. Ashford came with us, walking slowly with his cane. We carried a wreath of wildflowers Miss Willa had helped us gather. At the top of the hill, in a small clearing, surrounded by dogwood trees, was the family cemetery. Old stones going back to 1938, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandfather, who had built the first log cabin on this land when he came home from the First World War. And in the far corner, under a young dogwood tree that had just come into bloom, was my grandfather's headstone. Obadiah David Whitfield, 1948 to 2023, beloved father, faithful friend, and grandfather who never stopped hoping. Beside his headstone was one that had been placed there just 3 weeks ago, my mother's. Mr. Ashford had helped me arrange it. It had taken time and paperwork and a long conversation with the state of Tennessee, but he had brought her home. She had been buried in a public cemetery in Nashville, and now she rested here, next to the man she had never gotten to meet, Eleanor Doyle Whitfield, 1980 to 2022, loving mother, come home at last. And in the very corner of that little cemetery, marked by a simple stone with the seal of the United States Army on it, was my father's memorial. He was buried in a military cemetery outside Fort Campbell, but we had placed a stone for him here, so that he could rest symbolically with his family, so that all 3 of them could finally lie together in the same piece of Tennessee ground. David Obadiah Whitfield, Sergeant, United States Army, 1979 to 2017. Beloved son and father, rest with your family now. I laid the wreath of wildflowers between the 3 stones. Micah knelt down beside them. He put his small hand on my grandfather's marker. I wish I could have met you, he whispered. Ranger lay down between the three stones. He put his head on his paws. He let out a long, slow sigh, the way old dogs do when they are finally at rest. I stood there with the wind moving through the dogwoods. The petals were falling white and soft like a slow spring snow. I thought about how a person can come from a whole line of people they have never met. How love can be waiting on a hill for a lifetime. How a grandfather can write 47 letters into the darkness and never know if a single one will find its way home. But sometimes it does find its way home. Sometimes, against all the odds, a family finds itself again. "I'm here, Grandpa," I whispered. "We're here. We came home, and we're going to stay." The wind moved through the dogwood tree above me. A white petal drifted down and landed in my hair. I closed my eyes. I could almost hear him answering. That evening, I sat on the porch of Blackwood Farm and I watched the sun set over 87 acres of land that belonged to me and my brother. Micah was inside doing his homework at my grandfather's oak kitchen table. He had enrolled at the county high school. He had made 2 friends. He had joined the 4-H club, and Wendell was helping him raise a calf to show at the county fair in July. He talked now. He laughed now. He was 14 years old, and he was becoming the young man our father would have wanted him to be. Ranger was curled up at my feet, his old scarred head resting on my shoe. I held a cup of coffee in my hands. I watched the golden light spread across the soybean fields. I watched a red-tailed hawk circle high above the barn. I watched the world I had inherited settle into evening. I thought about the girl I had been 6 months ago, sitting in a Walmart parking lot in Franklin, $340 to her name. No home, no family, no idea what the world had waiting for her. That girl had believed she was alone. That girl had been wrong. I had been carried every one of those 18 years by a grandfather who wrote letters into the dark, by a father who had loved me even when his own pride had cost him everything, by a mother who had done the best she could with a wound that never healed, by a whole town of strangers who had been waiting quietly, patiently for me to come home so they could love me the way they had loved the people who came before me. I had been carried the whole time. I just hadn't known it. And that, dear listener, is where I want to leave Adeline and Micah for tonight. On the porch of Blackwood Farm with the sun going down over land that has been in their family for 4 generations. With a brother who has learned how to laugh again. With a dog who found his way home. With a grandfather resting on a hill under a dogwood tree at peace at last. If this story has touched your heart the way it has touched mine, I want to ask you to do 3 simple things before you go. First, please subscribe to this channel. Every story I share is a story about hope, about second chances, about finding home in the places you never expected. Your subscription helps me bring more of these stories to you. Second, please leave a comment. Tell me what part of Adeline's story touched you the most. Tell me about your own family. Tell me about a place that feels like home to you. Tell me about someone you loved who is waiting for you on a hill somewhere. I read every single comment. You are not just watching a video. You are part of a community. And third, please share this story with someone who needs it. Someone who is going through a hard time. Someone who is feeling alone. Someone who needs to hear that there is a place in this world where they belong. You never know whose life you might change with a single share. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. Thank you for loving Adeline and Micah. Thank you for believing alongside me that even when everything falls apart, love has a way of finding its way home. Until we meet again, my friends, sleep well, and remember, wherever you are tonight, you are loved. You have always been loved, and there is always a home waiting for you if you have the courage to walk through the door. Good night.